Hi guys, just starting here with the backhand shovel push with long pimples against a backspin ball. It's a reasonably medium sort of backspin there, and as you can see from the video, I'm really keeping the stroke very simple. Just a little not really a punch with the elbow, although there is a small bit of straightening. There's still that swinging from the elbow going on, but with the long pips I'm really not focusing on trying to float the ball. I'm really just focusing on working with that back spin that's already on the ball, and just using the backspin, adding to the backspin a little bit, slightly open blade, and just punching mainly forward and a little bit up to get some decent clearance over the net, and really just using my opponent's backspin to dip the ball sharply down the other side. And when performed correctly, it's a very safe stroke. There's not a lot that can go wrong because the stroke itself is fairly uncomplicated. The main things to watch is to get the bat angle correct and not to overhit. You're limited in how fast you can hit by really the amount of backspin that's been put on the ball. The more backspin on the ball, the harder you can hit, because the more topspin will be generated and the faster the ball will dip down on the other side. If your opponent's only giving you a light backspin, obviously you can then only hit a lot less hard. And of course, if the ball is higher, you can hit a little bit harder than if the ball is low. But the main thing is to work and find what your range of pace is for different amounts of backspin. Also, just making sure that you're not trying to hit too low over the net. If you're hitting very low over the net, obviously you can hit a bit harder. Your margin for error though will be a little bit less, and you'll be prone to make a few more mistakes. So it depends a little bit on how you're actually using this technique. Are you using it as a very aggressive option to force mistakes? Are you using it as a change to just give your opponent something new to think about? And now just doing a little bit of slow motion here to allow you to see without having to stop the video yourself, just to see how it works in slow motion. And again, you can see really a very simple stroke. Virtually no shoulder turn, left foot still forward, I'm still balanced and moving, and really not a lot of straightening of the elbow. I'm not trying to punch the ball, I'm really just swinging from the elbow only maybe a foot or so, and just using that relatively up and down blade that's maybe just tilted back a fraction to push upwards, forwards, and just turn that backspin into topspin onto the other side of the table. And looking just for, in myself, I'm looking for consistency of the stroke. I value that over the aggressive nature of trying to force pace when there perhaps isn't the opportunity. If the amount of backspin isn't enough, then I will play a little bit safer than try and take a risk and hit hard anyway. But that's, again, as a defender, that's possibly a little bit more in my nature. You can play lower, faster and harder, and you'll be playing a riskier, more aggressive game. And if you can still get enough on and make the percentages work in your favour, absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that's where I guess table tennis comes into individual preferences. And again, just looking here, you can see I'm really focusing closely on that ball coming in towards me. The free arm is doing its job. Not a lot of wrist in the stroke. I'm actually trying in this stroke to take the wrist out of the stroke a lot. Too much wrist in these sort of strokes, the extra wrist doesn't always add very much to it, because you're not going to add a lot to the stroke with the long pips. So extra wrist action really just increases the chances that you'll change your bat angle and make an error, and it doesn't really add a lot to the stroke itself. Of course, you could swing a little bit more sideways with the stroke to try and encourage a little bit of wobble and ball flight, and that could be an option as well. But all in all, a simple, basic, effective push. So let's now move to the front view of the stroke. Again, gives a good opportunity to see that the bat is really fairly vertical. You can virtually see the whole bat. Very little tilt in the bat itself, and the stroke itself is just a little bit forwards, a little bit upwards. It's not really a hit. My follow through on a hit, as you would have remembered possibly from the other videos, the follow through when I'm actually trying to hit and roll the ball is a much longer follow through. This is really, rather than me trying to impart a lot of topspin, I'm using the existing backspin and just getting the right bat angle and a little bit of upwards, just to basically give it enough flight and enough height over the net, and letting it turn that backspin into topspin and dip it down on the other side. So pluses and points in its favour, you can see, because there's not a lot of preparation required, there's not a lot of follow through, the stroke is short and compact without being jerky, of course. We don't want to be jerky, we still want to be smooth. But because the stroke doesn't need a lot of preparation, doesn't have a big follow through, it's harder for the opponent to work out what direction I'm going to play until the ball's already on its way over the table. There's not a lot of giveaways in my preparation about which way the ball's going to go. And this could be one case where, rather than say snapping the wrist to add to the spin, a little bit of breaking of the wrist just to change the direction of the ball can be very effective in actually making it difficult for your opponent to tell where the ball's going to go, because the backswing really doesn't give him, it's so short, it doesn't give him much visual cue. So a little turn of the wrist to the left or to the right can really move the ball around quite nastily without a lot of giveaways to the opponent. And of course, because you're pushing relatively fast off the ball, that can make things tougher as well. And now just moving again to just a slower version, so you get a little bit more chance just to see how simple the stroke really is. And not a lot of wrist. Certainly I'm not trying to add too much spin. Taking the ball, again, preferably between my left hip and my belly button. I don't want to be outside my left hip. I don't want to be on the right hand side of my body. I want to be in good position wherever possible. Left foot forward, which is where I feel comfortable and allows me to recover for a forehand easily. Good looking at the ball, watching the ball closely onto the bat. Good use of the free arm. Virtually no shoulder turn, just a little bit of dipping forward with that right shoulder to give myself some room to swing. And overall just looking balanced, comfortable, which is how it should be. This is a very simple stroke in terms of the mechanics. There's not a lot going on. The main issue here is to get the right bat angle for the amount of backspin that's been put on the ball, and also knowing your long pips, knowing the way that your particular long pips react to different amounts of backspin, so that you can get the right bat angle. And this can be sometimes why for some players where they're constantly changing the long pips, you always get a slightly different reaction, and it can be harder to get that right bat angle, resulting in that you make a few more mistakes than you really should. So I personally don't recommend changing your long pips too often. Find something that feels fairly decent and then just practice a whole lot more with them. And again, now just upping the pace of the push a little bit. I'm limited to an extent by the amount of backspin on the ball, and just really forward and a little bit upwards. Very compact stroke, and still very effective for those people who prefer to play close to the table. Again, this is not a stroke that's really a lot in my repertoire that I use a lot. I'll use it occasionally against weaker players. Against stronger players where I'm defending, it's not really something I need a lot, but certainly something that all long pip players should have. So let's look now at the side view version of the shovel push on the forehand. To some extent I actually find this shot easier on the forehand than on the backhand side. Not really sure why that is, perhaps just a small technique thing, but again it's possible to see really the ball dipping quite nicely without me having to do very much work. The long pips just transferring that backspin into topspin. Very abbreviated stroke, not much backspin. I'm barely even making it back to where my body would be. You can see quite easily from the video. Abbreviated follow through, and important to say it's not a jerky follow through. I'm not trying to cut the stroke short. It's just that the stroke itself doesn't need to be long, and because it doesn't need to be long, it's natural and smooth to keep it just short and easy like this, giving it fairly close to the full face of the bat and just easing the bat over. And now I'm just trying to hit a little bit faster and show what can be done in terms of the pace if you're given a good backspin ball. Again, you can still see on the forehand the shoulder turn to allow me to get into good position, and turning that foot to allow my knees to comfortably bend. And now you can see I'm upping the pace a bit and the bat is going further back. And again, it is just a simple extension of the stroke. As I want to hit harder, the shoulders turn a little bit more, the bat goes a little bit further back, but the basic stroke doesn't change all that much. And that consistency in the stroke, that building on the foundation between a shorter stroke to a slightly longer stroke, means that there's less to go wrong, because the overall stroke itself is really the same idea, but just a slightly bigger shoulder turn and a slightly bigger follow through the ball. That keeps things simple, and the simpler things are, the less things can really go wrong with this type of stroke. And now we'll just have a quick look at half speed, allowing you again here now to contrast the very short backswing, just a tiny little bit of shoulder turn and a little breaking of the wrist there that I'm using just to get the bat into a good position. I think the breaking of the wrist isn't really essential. Again, this is not a stroke I perform a lot myself, and that is just part of my technique, but certainly not something I'd say to everybody. Break that wrist to do it. If you don't need to do it, don't do it. Free arm working well, stepping back into position, and you can see here it's an example of how I really step in with the right foot for that shorter ball to allow me to stay balanced. Good example just of really basic one-step footwork actually. And looking at the ball, not trying to do anything too radical with the stroke itself, and the idea being is, again, you as the person close to the table with the inverted and the long pips, you're trying to use those to provide variation, to confuse your opponent, to make him hesitate. So you're not looking to take a lot of risky shots that aren't necessary and give him a lot of cheap points. You're trying to apply pressure, make him play a lot of balls, make him concentrate hard, make him hesitate, play safer. And if you're playing too aggressively, then you're going to give him too many easy points and take the pressure off. So it's a fine line. You don't want to necessarily, some people play defensively, some people play aggressively. You have to find that balance that's right for you. Playing too defensively, too passively gives your opponent the chance to dominate you. Playing too aggressively takes the pressure off him and gives him the chance then to relax a little bit, because your mistakes will allow him to basically survive and recover. So it's a real art to it in that respect. But the stroke itself, again, as you can see, just simple, efficient, effective, and you can modify it once you've mastered the basics. with a little bit of wrist or similar. Let's finish now with the long pips shovel push, just the front view version, and again allows you to see the very vertical bat face, using those long pips to turn the backspin into topspin. And again, my long pips are I'm using with no sponge, which gives me a little bit more, in my opinion, a little bit more reversal on these type of strokes. But the shot again is simple, just a little shoulder turn to bring the bat back into position, and not much backswing, not much follow through. Certainly, apart from my little breaking of the wrist, there's certainly no wrist snap to try to add spin. And by keeping the stroke that simple, there's less mechanically that can go wrong with the stroke. And all I really have to do is get the right bat angle for the actual amount of backspin put on the ball. And if I can do that, I'm pretty much guaranteed a successful result. And that takes out the amount of how much do I have to get underneath the ball, how much do I have to try and bend the pips. It really simplifies things down. As I was mentioning just previously, once this basics is mastered, you can then move to other variations, using more wrist, using different placement, getting underneath and using the pips a little bit more. All of these add extra variation without causing you too much effort once you've mastered the basic process and the basic stroke itself. But learn the fundamentals before trying to move to the advanced versions. Get a good success rate on this stroke in the basic form, and then you can move to the more advanced usage of it before having to do anything else. So just to continue through, just picking up the pace a little bit here and showing what can be done in terms of pace if your opponent gives you enough backspin, and you can get a quite decent amount of pace off the ball provided the backspin is there. And now let's just finish with half speed version, just slowing down the stroke. Really can see it's just a little bit of forward and up, nothing going on with the wrist at all, no punching with the elbow, just swinging from the elbow and the shoulder a little bit. And overall a stroke not much more than 1.5 feet in length, 2 feet at the very most, so no need for big backswings, and just recovering after the stroke itself. And it's important to make sure that you do recover and don't just get stuck leaning on that right foot and stuck over your forehand side. So recovery is really an essential part of the stroke to allow you to get in position for the next one. But overall, it's this type of shovel push, turning the backspin into topspin. When performed correctly, it's technically quite simple, though you can make it more complex and make it a little bit tougher for your opponent to read. It's effective in that you can generate some nice pace depending on how much backspin is on the ball. The placement that you can do you can jam him up quite easily, and for an unsuspecting opponent, it's often a good chance for you to turn a pushing rally suddenly into a topspin rally. And if your opponent's not quite ready, not watching, you can often force from him a sort of either a block that can go without a lot of pace on his part, or a push that goes very high, and the next ball you can follow up with an attack. So in terms of my own patterns, rather than playing this stroke over and over again, I would tend to play a few pushes, look for this stroke to bring in a topspin element, suddenly bring topspin in, and hope to catch my opponent napping so that I get either a weak block or a a push that will pop up high, and I would be looking to top spin the next ball and really bring in my attack with the inverted rubber.